Welcome to the Commonwealth Home Ownership Podcast, the real estate investing podcast for Canadians. Whether you're a seasoned investor or just getting started, you've come to the right place. If you're looking for a way to take control of your life through real estate investing, stay tuned and be sure to join us at CWHO.ca, your hub for all things real estate investing in Canada.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Commonwealth Home Ownership Real Estate Podcast. So this week we want to try something a little bit different. So every month we have a live Mastermind event on the last Tuesday of every month. And last month's event was so good that we wanted to turn it into a podcast and share it with those who missed it. So for this week's episode, we'll have myself, we'll have Victor Pang, and we'll have Brad Price presenting. And with myself, we'll go over how to manage your energy cycles over the course of the day. With Victor Pang, we'll go into private lending in real estate. And with Brad Price, we'll go into how to dominate in 2021. So I hope you guys enjoy. All right. So for those of you who don't know me, I am the other half of Commonwealth Home Ownership with Brad here. You might have heard me on some of my podcasts. So I've been an investor for quite a few years now, have a decent sized portfolio, mostly buy and holds up in Edmonton. I have recently published a book late last year about how to get started in investing in real estate. It is called The Real Estate Side Hustle for Investors. You can find it on Amazon. And I still have a full-time job. For those of you who are, thinking that you can't do this with a full-time job, you can totally do it with a full-time job. I'm still a full-time pharmacist. So, but I love this stuff. I totally nerd out on it, and I love sharing what I learn to others. So today I want to talk about energy management. So I call time management's bigger brother, just because a lot of people talk about. Oh, let me give me a second. Let me get control here. Sorry, guys. All right. So a lot of people talk about time management, and which is great. Time management is important in terms of how you manage your time, but what they don't talk a lot about is how you manage your energy. So just because no matter how much time you have, if you don't manage your energy properly, time doesn't really matter in the end. But let's just go over a few time management techniques that you may have heard about. So first of all, time blocking your calendar. This is very popular. Schedule what you need to do over the course of your day. What gets scheduled gets done. I subscribe to this on my Google Calendar is a good example of that. Looks very similar to that. Next is do the hardest thing first, right? Or as you may have heard, Eat That Frog. I don't know if any of you read that book, but it's all about doing the hardest thing first. Get that out of the way. Use the Pomodoro technique. Pomodoro is actually Italian for tomato. So if you've ever heard the tomato timer technique, set a timer for 25 minutes. Do as much as you can in 25 minutes, take a 5-minute break, and then repeat. And do that, over 3-4 times, take a longer break, repeat that over the course of the day. The whole idea is to get as much done in a short amount of time. Putting the time pressure on you pushes you to get more done faster. Batch similar tasks together. So science has shown that by switching tasks, it typically takes time. It takes your mind a while to switch gears. So by batching similar tasks together allows you to get more done in a short amount of time. And learn how to say no to less important tasks. So focus on prioritizing what's important. A phrase I heard Tim Ferriss say, if it's not a hell yes, it's a no. So something to live by. But what is energy management? So first of all, energy management starts with your circadian rhythm. Circadian rhythm is you may have heard of it, but it's the internal clock, it's an internal biological clock that all organisms have, whether it be a plant, a bacteria, an animal. All animals have a circadian rhythm, and it tells you when to wake up, when to go to sleep, when to eat, and it controls your physiological and biological and psychological rhythms throughout the day. So each of us has what's called a chronotype. So this is the personal circadian rhythm that influences each of our personal physiology and psychologies. So you may have heard of the terms LARKs, owls. So these are stereotypes of different chronotypes. And there's more and more evidence showing that a lot of these chronotypes are genetic. You're actually born an owl or born a lark. There is environmental factors and there is biological factors over the course of the day, over the course of your lifetime that changes these. But for the most part, a lot of these are genetic. So just because you don't like getting up in the morning doesn't mean you're lazy. It just means you're born that way. Okay, so don't feel bad about that. So in the entrepreneurial world, I find that there is a lot of reverence for early risers, and I feel like that's a bit of a bias.
I would like to jump in on that because I'm definitely not a morning person, but I can sit up till 2 in the morning and happily work away. And comes natural.
So if this presentation seems a little biased, thanks Brad for that. It seems a little biased because I too am an owl. Sorry. So, but I do feel the morning people do get a little bit too much credit, just because if you look at all the books that are out there, it talks about how awesome it is to wake up at 5 in the morning and crush the day. I mean, it's great for those people who can't get up at 5 in the morning and have a clear brain. But for some of us, that doesn't happen. And you rarely, actually never, I did it as a search, you cannot find a book that says how stay up late to be productive or anything along those lines, right? It's like crush your goals at 2 in the morning. There's nothing like that. It's always morning books. But there are famous night owls. And the thing is with mornings, I find that I think a lot of those people get recognized more because our society is geared for morning early risers. It is not made for night owls. Work starts at 7, 8 in the morning. Work does not go late. So those who do well early tend to be noticed, and those who don't do late tend to be a little bit more obscure. But there are a lot of famous night owls. For example, Bob Dylan is a good one. Thomas Edison, known for staying up till 6 in the morning, working on his projects. Barack Obama, famous night owl, and this guy, as you might know. So, but more and more evidence, like I said, is showing that it doesn't mean that we don't get things done as night owls. It just means that we just do them at a different time. So how to determine your personal chronotype. So on a free day, so on a day where you have no obligations, are not working, ask yourself these 3 questions. What time do you usually go to sleep? If you could just go on your own. What time do you usually wake up if you had no alarm? And what is the middle of these 2 times? For example, if you go to bed at 11:30 and you wake up at 7:30, then the middle time would be 3:30. So in order to determine your chronotype, I found this little infographic, which is great. It's from a book called When by Daniel Pink. And it shows that if your wake up time, or if your middle of the time is between 1 a.m. to 3:30 a.m., you're a lark. Between 3:30 a.m. and 5:30 a.m., you're what's called a third bird. So you're not a specifically owl. Like most people are actually not one or the other. 65% of the population actually fall into the third bird category. However, you still wake up relatively early compared to owls, whose middle time is starts at 6 a.m. So, and these chronotypes actually change. I mentioned this earlier, but chronotypes actually change over the course of your lifetime. As for anyone who's a parent would know, babies or young kids are typically larks. They like to wake up early. And once you move into your teens and your 20s, you gradually become an owl. So in teenagers, if you remember those times, waking up for school was one of the hardest things to do in the world. And then as you move into older age, as you progress, as you get older, you slowly become a lark again. And that's why a lot of seniors like to go to bed early, because they tend to wake up early as well. So 25% are solid evening types. And then there's the personality types associated with those. You can see it's right there. Or another easier way to ask yourself to figure out your chronotype is, what time do you wake up on the weekends when you don't have to work? And so if you wake up around the same time you would if you were working, or in the weekday, then you're likely a lark. If you wake up a little bit later, you're likely a third bird. If you wake up more than 90 minutes after you typically wake up during a weekday, then you're likely an owl. I'll leave that up there for just another second if you want to take a picture of it.
Phil, can you, before you jump on to the next one, the previous slide, can you explain the previous slide a little more?
Yeah.
This one here. So the example at the bottom, what are we doing here?
So the example, for example, what is the middle of those two times? So when you go to bed and when you wake up, find the middle time. So the example is if you go to bed at 11:30 and you wake up at 7:30, what is that? What is the middle time of those times? What is 4 hours past 11:30, right? Which is 3:30 in the morning. And then if you go to this graph here, if you see the graph here, 3:30 would land you kind of more or less in the LARK territory.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So, and depending on that, so that graph in the middle there determines what your middle time is. So if your middle time, your midpoint of sleep is any of those times, then it categorizes you in that category. So Brad, if you go to bed at 2 a.m. and you wake up at 10 a.m., the middle time is 6 a.m., which will land you at the beginning of the owl territory.
Got it. Thank you.
That makes sense. So so what if your chronotypes are a little bit different, right? So every person's circadian rhythm, this has been proven over studies for thousands of people, follows a very common trend in terms of energy and emotional peaks and troughs over the course of the day. So everybody, regardless of whether you're an owl or a lark, follows everyone has a peak, a trough, and a rebound. So right here is the first peak. That's a peak, that's a trough, and that's a rebound. However, these peak, trough, and rebound patterns are a little bit different whether you are a lark, a third bird, or an owl. So lark and third bird energy levels look something like this. Very, very, very typical. You peak in the early morning, early afternoon. You trough approximately 7 hours after you wake up. So at 2 or 3 in the afternoon, between 1 and 5 in the afternoon, you have a bit of trough. That's your low point. If any of you've all experienced this, likely, you after lunch, you feel very tired. You just want to take a nap. You feel very low in energy. You don't really want to do much. And then later in the evening, after you come home from work, you get a rebound. And some people think that might just be a result of not being at work anymore, which is fine. But it's actually a natural energy pattern that a lot of people have. So for larks and third birds, your peak is where you are most productive. So you are the sharpest at your peak. So you want to group tasks that require vigilance and clear thinking at your peak period. So that includes any problem-solving things you might have, any important decisions you might have to make. You want to put it in your peak. For your rebound, you're typically not as sharp as when you're when you are at your peak. So here you want to schedule tasks that require a little bit more disinhibition and creativity. So a little bit more insight. For brainstorming is a good example of what you would put in your rebound time. Any creative projects, writing, if you're doing the writing projects that require a little bit of creativity, would be a good time to place in your rebound. And I'll go over the trough a little bit later, but here there are specific ways you can mitigate, that downturn of your day. Owls, on the other hand, are scheduled a little bit differently. So their energy patterns look the same. I mean, in terms of peak and rebound, and they still have those ups and downs throughout the day. However, they take a little bit longer to ramp up in the morning. So instead of a peak, trough, rebound, they have a rebound, trough, peak pattern. So in the mornings, that's when they should schedule some of their more creative tasks. And then in the evening is when they should schedule some of their more vigilance and clear thinking tasks, just because that is when owls peak. I find, Brad, I'm sure you've experienced this, but sometimes at midnight you find you're most productive, right? Versus first thing in the morning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can definitely relate to that trough there at 2 p.m. I mean, some days would be like clockwork. Literally, I could look at the clock and see 2 p.m. and just a feeling, that kind of drained feeling, mentally drained, tired. It was almost like I needed to go and have a nap. And then, once kind of 4 o'clock, 4:30, 5 o'clock hit, I would literally start feeling like, okay, now it's time to work, which always felt strange because that would be the time that you're leaving work.
Yes.
So it's such a weird, organic feeling, but it's real. So
yeah, and which is why it's tough because society gears towards morning birds, like morning larks, right? They all the work is scheduled in the morning, where they are most productive, but sometimes we're not at our top performance for those who are owls. Unfortunately, owls are only 25% of the population, so no one really cares. So let's talk about the trough, that little dip in the middle of the day. So it typically happens around 7 hours after waking, give or take. You know, it changes, it's unique to everyone, but in general, around 7 hours after waking. And scientists have measured that the difference of performance between the peak and the trough is equivalent to being legally intoxicated. Right? It's just significant. Like you don't feel it, but I mean, if imagine trying to drive while you're trying to in that trough, you almost feel like you're drunk sometimes. So, in that which case, pull over, take a nap, take a break. But how do we mitigate those troughs? All right, how do we prevent those dips in the day from, ruining our productivity, or how do we make it so that we can at least use that point to recharge to make the rest of our day better?
I'm sure we've all had those days where you drive home from work in the afternoon, you get home and you think to yourself, I don't even really remember driving home, because you're in that trough state.
Exactly. And there's definitely time to pull over, because that's also when you're really tired, you also fall into what they call micro sleeps, where you kind of just your attention just breaks for just a second, but that's usually enough to get into an accident. So also be very mindful. If you're feeling really tired, pull over, take a 10-minute break. That's enough to recharge. So how to mitigate that trough? Taking frequent breaks throughout the day. And research has shown that even a 5-10 minute break is enough to boost your energy levels after that break. So if you take frequent breaks throughout the day, you might not feel that trough as sharply. Go for a walk. Activity is always better than no activity. So if you're taking a break, go for a walk outside. It's way better than sitting at a desk. Get social. If you can talk to others, if you can socialize with other coworkers, and you can talk about things other than work, that tends to boost your energy levels. And go outside. It's super important. Sunlight is extremely effective in waking you up. The reason sunlight is good compared to your ambient light is sunlight has it's a full spectrum of light, but it more importantly has blue light. And blue light is actually what inhibits melatonin production in your brain. And melatonin is this hormone that causes you to get drowsy. So by inhibiting melatonin, it wakes you up. However, this is also why having screens right before bed, like TVs, phones, is also bad, because phones also emit blue light, which also inhibits melatonin production. So if you do that before you go to sleep, that might also make it harder to fall asleep. And detach. Super important to detach from work. Research has shown that even reading emails during your break can lead to increased fatigue. So it's important to get away from work as best you can. So really the best way to mitigate that trough is to go with a coworker outside for a walk, for a break, and talk about anything other than work. That's probably one of the best ways to boost your energy. And lastly, if you don't want to do any of those, take a nap. Naps are great if you do it right. All right. There's naps, because I know a lot of people, there's a stigma against naps, because naps will make you not be able to sleep at night. Naps make you feel super groggy when you wake up and you feel unproductive. There is a way to take a nap that you can prevent all of those things. So I want to talk about how to take the perfect afternoon nap. So this is, and I love this. I do this often. So first of all, find your afternoon trough time. When do you typically feel tired the most during the course of your day? And what you can do, if most of you likely know, but if you really want to find out, you can always do a journal. Set your alarm every 90 minutes. Ask yourself, what are you doing, and what are your energy levels? And do that for a week. And then that way you can graph that over the course of a week, and then you have a good idea when your trough times are. Secondly, find a peaceful place to take a nap. Okay. office couch, car, if you're at work, if it's not too cold or too hot. Secondly, down a cup of coffee or caffeine beverage of your choice. So this is a little bit different, but it's cool because caffeine actually takes about 30 minutes, 25 to 30 minutes to hit your bloodstream. So if you can down a whole cup of coffee or take a caffeine pill, 1 to 200 milligrams, that is equivalent to a medium to large cup of coffee. One medium cup of coffee has about 100 milligrams of caffeine. A venti from Starbucks has about 180 milligrams of caffeine. So 1 to 200 milligrams of caffeine right before you decide to take your nap. And then set a timer for 25 to 30 minutes. This is super important, do not let your nap exceed 30 minutes. If it exceeds 30 minutes, that's when you trigger what's called sleep inertia. And sleep inertia is that groggy feeling when you wake up and you feel, super lethargic, and it takes you some time to get back going again. As long as it stays under 30 minutes, so ideally between 10 to 20 minutes is a perfect time. And then, so by having caffeine right before your nap, you just get the added benefit of both the boost from the caffeine and the re-energizing boost from your short nap. So to avoid sleep inertia, the perfect nap duration is 10 to 20 minutes. So they've actually done studies on this. 10 to 20 minutes is perfect. It takes about 5 minutes to fall asleep. You nap for about 20 minutes. Your alarm goes off at 30 minutes. You stay under that. You still get a nap within that range. Anything less than 5 minutes actually has very little benefit, and anything over 30 minutes triggers sleep inertia. So this graph explains it very well. If you take a brief short nap, it'll give you that boost, the cognitive boost, without that dip after you wake up. And it doesn't last as long. That boost doesn't last as long. So also, if you take too long a nap, that also where it affects your nighttime sleep, because that effect from the sleep lasts longer. So it might actually go into when you actually have to go to sleep. Whereas a short, brief nap, 20-minute nap will give you that boost without causing you not to be able to sleep later in the night. And all this I've gone over is moot if you don't get proper sleep, right? So proper sleep is the foundation of everything you do. And more, and the latest in sleep science has shown that sleep is actually more important than almost anything you do in your life, frankly. If you think about it, sleep is, evolutionarily speaking, sleep is terrible, right? Sleep, when you're sleeping, you can't protect yourself, you can't forage for food, you can't, you can't reproduce, you can't mate, you can't do anything other than sleep. Sleep leaves you extremely vulnerable. So evolutionarily speaking, you think evolution would have eliminated sleep if for the benefit of the species, but instead it has made sleep stuck around, and it makes sleep a third of our lives. So that itself is showing that how important sleep is. Only recently have we really discovered how important sleep is in terms of our health and our performance. And the worst part about not getting enough sleep is that you don't even know it. They've done studies where they've shown, ask someone to take 8 hours of sleep or 6 hours of sleep, and the performance, and they do a survey and they feel exactly the same. But when they actually test their performance, the person who got 6 hours sleep performs way worse than the person who actually got a full 8 hours, even though they feel exactly the same. They don't feel any worse. So even if you feel great, you might be performing poorly and you don't even know it. So yeah, what I mentioned earlier. And so ideal sleep time has been 7.5 to 8.5 hours, ideally. And this is sleep time. So make sure you give yourself enough sleep opportunity in bed to actually achieve this sleep time, right? Just because you're in bed for 7.5 hours doesn't mean you actually get 7.5 hours of sleep. So it takes time to fall asleep. So something to keep in mind. So in summary, important to manage your time and utilize time management strategies to maximize productivity, but it's also important to know when to schedule those tasks throughout the day. To mitigate troughs, take frequent breaks, go outside, socialize, detach, or take a coffee nap. And if you guys are interested in learning more about the subjects, there's a couple books I found as really good resources on this. It's one is When by Daniel Pink, and the second is Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, PhD. Matthew Walker is actually from the UK, for those who care. So from where you're from, Wayne. And the audiobook is actually with an English accent, which is kind of nice. Anyway, so Any questions anyone might have? That was a very brief overview. Like if you read those books, there's way more data and way more research on this subject, but I thought I'd give you guys a very brief highlight on those subjects that I found very fascinating in terms of increasing your productivity.
Yeah, it's definitely really important. I mean, when you're working on multiple projects or businesses, I mean, you tend to push sleep aside so that you can just continue to get through whatever it is you need to get done. But it actually ends up having a little bit of a negative effect. And you end up run down and having to sleep anyway and less productive.
And you're way less productive. Yeah, by sleeping more, you actually get less done. You get more done in less time.
Yeah, it's efficient. It is hard to manage it because it just doesn't feel like at the time, it doesn't feel like you need to take heed. So thanks for the presentation, Phil.
You're welcome. And Amanda just has a question. What if you sleep too much? So research has shown that sleep is actually a bit of a bell curve. If you sleep too much, if you sleep more than 10 hours a day, it does show a decline in overall health. They're not really sure how yet. I think they're still doing research on that, but but if you sleep too much, it actually shows a bit of a decline.
I'm with Jeff. No such thing. But that's great. All right, guys, we'll keep moving here. We've still got a few things to get through. So I'm just going to take back control here, Phil. And I can see Victor's joined us. He's making me jealous. He's got a beer in front of him. And it's probably because he can't go on vacation right now. So he's making the most of the downtime. Before we jump on the call here with Victor, I just want to mention, so as we talked about earlier, and Wayne, thanks for the shout out in regards to the associate program. If anybody is interested in finding out more about the program, it does run for 9 months. There's an enrollment which we set each associate up with all the accounts that we use as real estate investors. That includes Pro Zoom account, ProMonday.com account, Pro G Suite accounts, Pro Sign Now account for digital document signing, amongst other things. So that's a one-time enrollment fee of $11.40, monthly coaching for 9 months, and the capital investment is $6,800 for each associate. So the next program here kicks off basically now, end of this month, start of March. And we have a few spots available. So if anybody is interested, please reach out and you can join the program for 2021. All right. So Victor, welcome, buddy.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time. You're a busy guy and looking forward to hearing about what you're up to in the private lending world.
Well, I mean, it's the same old, just keep plugging along, and once you get the loans out, it's pretty passive.
That's what we like to hear. So for people on the call today joining us, so Victor, you're a realtor, you've got your own brokerage, the Pang team, and you're also the founder and principal of Enter Exit Real Estate. So do you want to just give everybody a brief kind of overview of all things real estate that you do?
Okay, well, I'm a realtor. I do real estate sales, buying and selling. I run a little team called the Pang team. We're under the brokerage Grand Realty. We also do property management. We're roughly managing about 40 plus properties. And we also do some private lending.
Beautiful. So full circle real estate.
Yeah, pretty much whatever the clients need. I mean, it's not too hard of a learning curve because it's all real estate related.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you still doing flip projects?
Not too much, no.
No, so you moved out of that aspect of real estate at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, we just kind of like the lending.
So yeah, let's talk about that. So what is private lending for real estate investors? Because we hear about big banks, traditional lending, and then we also hear the words private lending. What's the difference, Victor?
So institutional lending comes from big financial institutions. Whereas private lending comes from, well, also some larger private corporations and then also individuals and smaller companies. So private lenders generally lend on real estate, secured investments. So they'll give you a loan based on the security of the property, and not so much as your credit.
So can anybody be a private lender then?
Anybody can lend their own money. So anybody can be a private lender lending their own money.
Okay, interesting. And is there any particular requirements that somebody might need to adhere to not contradict the Securities Act when lending out their own funds? Is there any specifics there?
Yeah, I mean, you can only advertise your own money. You can't charge a criminal interest rate, which is, I think, something like 50% or something.
So 40% okay.
I don't know, it's pretty high. I'm like, you never come close to the criminal interest rate. But I mean, like, it's a great, like, once you're a little bit further along in your real estate journey, you'll find that you'll tend to have some excess funds, and that maybe you don't want to deploy everything into real estate yourself as actively. So what you'll do is you'll become a private money lender. So like generally, it's kind of like the normal transition is you're a real estate investor, and then eventually you get a bit more capital, and you're not looking at increasing your portfolio as much. So what happens is you start lending the money out at 10%, 12%, 15%. And then you'll create your own rules, just kind of like the banks. You'll lend at like 80% loan to value or 65% loan to value, just depending on the interest rate you're offering, and the need for the capital.
Okay, so all these loans are secured against a piece of real estate, correct?
That's correct. So I would say being a private lender is like one of the safest things you can do in this age of time, because, let's talk like 100 years ago, there were private lenders back then too, and you would lend it to like this dictator, and then they would go capture some other land and territories, and then they didn't want to pay you back. So what they would do, they would just send their army and kill you. But these days, it's like one of the most secure things you can do. You literally place a mortgage on title, under your corporation or under your name. And then if they don't pay you, you want to work with them, of course, but the worst comes to worst, as long as you have the correct conditions in place, like your equity protects you, doing like an 80% loan to value and the market hasn't dropped off enough, then you can file for foreclosure and make them pay you back by forcing them to sell the house. So no one's going around killing people like 100 years ago. It's like one of the safest things you can do, because where can you get like a 12 to 18% return on your money with a 20% security buffer?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the only downside to that, I would say, is that your earnings are capped because that's how the structure works. The structure works is you lend the money at a predefined interest rate. So you can't ever gain enormous amounts beyond that. Like if you own a piece of real estate, maybe that house appreciates 100%. So now what we're doing is we're defining the income you're going to make, but it's nice because if your money's not deployed, you don't pay anything on it. You don't pay anything just to have your money sitting around. If you have a piece of real estate sitting there vacant, you have to pay for it. And you don't have, there's less risk to losing your capital if you're following the strict criteria that you set out.
And the criteria is something that you set, right? It's not something that you discuss with the homeowner or the person borrowing the money. It's something that you define yourself and then you just let others know, or is it something that you actually negotiate with the borrower?
So generally every lender will have their own criteria, and then they may make exceptions per case.
Okay. So what what qualifies someone for you to lend to then, Victor?
Generally, we're looking for kind of a good history. We do like to see good credits. That's not necessarily the primary factor, though. Like, we want to see that there's enough equity in the property that, should the worst case occur, that we will be able to recollect our capital from the property in the case of default. But what we do want to see is, generally, like, the main question is, why do you want the money? How long do you need it? And how are you planning to exit? Like, how do you plan to pay us back? And if it makes sense, then we're good to go. But if they just like look to borrow the money for no reason, then generally we're not doing it.
Okay.
So when you say no reason, does that mean that there's no way for you to secure the money against the title, or like what does that mean? No reason. Talk us through that.
I mean, there's definitely always credit seekers, right? And if they don't have like a proper exit strategy, we don't want to do it. And then we're not in the business, like, we can do a lot of loans, but if the file doesn't look right and we know that they're not going to be able to pay us back, and that we know ahead of time that the only way we're going to be able to get repaid is forcing a foreclosure, we don't want to do that, because it's not in our business to be foreclosing on people.
Yeah, and that's probably a costly process that's going to reduce your return on investment potentially if it ends up getting a little bit messy.
Yeah, I mean, if there's still enough equity, you'll still get paid out completely. But it's, I don't know, it's just not in our business model. Like, there's definitely like some lenders who will do that kind of thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're really looking to work with people, like, say, they've got an exit strategy. So people that are doing, maybe it's an assignment. They're focusing on assignments or flip projects, renovations, that type of thing, where they're going to get into a property, fix it up, and then move it on.
Yeah, that's right. So like, renovator flippers are like one of the main borrowers, because they'll understand that borrowing the money up front is quite expensive. But it'll be part of their math. So generally, like, the big institutions don't like to lend to renovator flippers because the money's too short term. So they don't like to lend like a 3-month loan or like a 6-month loan. So we'll lend to renovator flippers as long as the security looks correct and they have an exit strategy. Usually their exit strategy is refinance or sell the property and then pay the loans off. So they'll do their massing, maybe the hard money. So private lenders are also called hard money lenders because we lend against security like real estate. They'll understand that the borrowing the capital will be about 20,000, and then maybe the renovation cost will be 60,000, and they're trying to make like 200,000.
Mm-hmm. So, for example, like you said, you've got this cost of borrowing, that's what you're talking about, that 20,000, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So for yourself, when you're looking at doing these loans, is that 20,000 you're referring to, is that just an interest only payment on top of the principal loan? And is that paid out monthly, or what do you typically, what typically would your terms be in that scenario?
Typically we have a 1% to 3% setup fee on the loan. And then on average, we have like a 12% interest rate. And then they all kind of vary from deal to deal. But those are the general numbers you see.
Mm-hmm. And those payments, would they be monthly payments?
Generally they're monthly payments, interest only. So if you took like a $400,000 loan, maybe you'd see a 2% setup fee, 8,000, 12% interest, 48,000 a year divided by 12 is 4,000 a month.
Yeah, so you definitely have to do your math when you're looking at project costs and incorporate that into the project, and especially if the project's going to run longer than your determined time frame, you need to account for that as well. Because if especially in these times with COVID slowing down supply of materials and deliveries and all that kind of stuff, if the project runs 1 month longer, that's instantly you've got another $4,000 there that needs to be paid for that extra month. So it's really important. I think we have a couple of questions here, Phil, in the chat.
Yeah, so I have a question from Becca here, or Rebecca here. So when you qualify a person for a loan, do you look into personal income, or are you just looking strictly at the property?
We look at both. So we look at personal income to see if you can afford the payments. We also want to see like your credit history. It's pretty similar to filling out a mortgage application. We want to see like a history of good financial habit. So if we were to pull like a credit file and review your mortgage application with us for a private loan, and you see that we just see like constant non-payments and missed payments and bad credit, that's just a predicator that we're going to be the next one in line to experience this.
Okay. And another question we got is this a tool typically used for a bridging loan?
Yeah, so you'll see private loans being used for renovation flips, bridge financing. Again, there needs to be enough security in the property. So a lot of like investors that we lend to, they'll have like a house sold and they'll borrow money from that project to move on to the next project. So while that's closing before possession date, they already got their next project on hold from a bridge loan.
Okay.
And then we'll also land on debt consolidation. So generally, those debt consolidation files come from mortgage brokers who will understand the financial file quite well of the borrower, and they'll have a financial plan to help them pay it out through a refinance in the next 1 or 2 years.
Okay. I think Rebecca, just looking back at her previous question there, I think what her question was, she was angling at is, how about for business owners who may not have a high personal income just because they are trying to reduce their personal taxes, but their business generates good income? How does that factor into your qualification process?
So we would look at that too. And it depends if they're borrowing the money under their corporation. So if they're acquiring the property under their corp or their personal name.
Okay.
If they're acquiring it under their corp, we would make them have a personal guarantee. So the mortgage would be under the corporation. The property is owned by the corporation. We would have a personal guarantee from the individual.
Okay. So the individual is still responsible for the loan in the end. Okay.
Are there any situations these days where a personal guarantee is not required for whereby a corporation owns an asset?
You know what? It's always quite flexible, to be honest. It's always, there's enough equity, I guess we don't really care. It's just all about security. The lender is primarily focused on protecting their capital. Like, can we get our capital back? Because if you're doing like $100,000 to $200,000 loans and you're making like 20 grand or 15,000 or 12,000 and you lose 100,000, then it's just not worth doing these loans, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is quite a big risk when you think about it from that perspective. That for that what seems like the interest rates, they seem like high interest rates, but when you put it in perspective with the risk that goes along with putting up large sums of cash, really, for investors to go and utilize on projects. I mean, there's a reason that they are set up that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's different for private lenders too, right? Because we don't have the leverage that the banks have, right? The banks get like this huge credit line from the public's money, right? They get to lend at like 1 to 10. You put $1 in the bank, they lend out 10. Private lenders, we have $1, we lend out $1.
Yeah, so you lose $1, you lose $1.
Yeah, it's also correct. Yeah, we're not backed. We're not the only security we have is the property, right? So we're really trying to do the due diligence on the applicant and the property.
So So go ahead, Phil.
No, okay. I was just curious, like in terms of how much money as a private lender, how much money should you get before you should get started as a private lender? Like how much cash do you want in the bank before you want to look at being a private lender?
I mean, it kind of depends where you're lending. I mean, as a small number, maybe 50 grand would be okay to start, but you do like maybe one loan a year. And that would be a small loan of maybe someone needs money for renovations. Like that would be a small renovation loan secured against the title. And to be honest, like the more capital you have, like the more secure the loan is generally. So because just like a mortgage on a title, the security is based on registration order.
Mm-hmm.
So generally you'll see like a TD Bank on first position. But if you're going to lend like 400 grand, maybe you're the first position and anybody after you gets paid last. So the person in first position gets paid first back, and then everybody subsequently gets paid after with whatever is remaining.
Okay.
I would say, yeah.
So go ahead.
No, I was just thinking out aloud here. So just where there's situations whereby, you may have something registered in first position and then you're going to a big bank after the fact for something else. Have you ever run into situations, Victor, whereby, you've been in first position and somebody's trying to work with a big bank and the big banks have said, well, we're not going to work with you because you've already got something registered on title? Or do you know of issues in that regard?
Not in first position. In first position, generally, they're going to the banks to refinance you out. So generally, they'll go to the bank, they'll get a first position mortgage, and that first position mortgage will pay our mortgage out, and they'll take over first position. I've seen some issues in second and third position, depending on what they're trying to do. And generally, that's just that's a problem of a loan to value issue. So again, like the banks will lend maybe 80% loan to value. And maybe they've already borrowed an 80% loan to value from us, right? Whereas strategically, if they needed some small injection of capital, they should get the first position from a major bank and then a second position from a private lender, because we have less restrictions and qualifications than the larger institutions. Because the larger institutions are really focused on credit, really focused on your debt service ratio. So if you're a renovator flipper, it's also harder to qualify for stated income for entrepreneurs. You need 2 years stated income. Private lenders, we don't require that. We require security in the property.
So what about experience, Victor? If somebody comes in and says, I'm going to do a renovation on this house and I need to borrow, $150,000 to pay for the renovation. And maybe they're using another lender for the main mortgage component, and they're coming to you for the renovation cost. And they say, this is my first project. Like, are you still just looking at the house, or are you now looking at their situation and their experience? Like, are they able to execute this project? Because really, if they're borrowing the renovation money, well, that property is not yet worth the ARV, the after repair value, because it's not yet fixed. It's not renovated yet.
So we would lend up to 80% on the today value. So like we're not lending ARV. It's kind of a complicated calculation and it increases our risk.
Mm-hmm.
And every lender has, again, like pretty specific criteria, right? I'll lend on a lot of renovation projects because I know I can take them over and finish it in the worst case scenario. But I won't lend on new builds. So like a new build, I know that I have to team up with like another builder, and then it'd be kind of out of my control. And those costs can just run out of hand, right?
Yeah. Okay. That's good to know. And that's important to know too, for people looking to do renovation projects, that there's a difference between 80% loan to value on what the property's worth today and ARV, after repair value, what it's worth in the future. So, when you are running your numbers, it's not safe to assume that every private lender will just loan to you based on what the house is worth down the road.
Yeah, and then to answer your question about experience, generally it's hard for us to understand your experience unless you've been borrowing with us directly for the last 10 files. So for us, if you're like a new file, a new borrower to us, we treat you just like every other file. Like, we assume that you have a plan to execute, and we don't really make any exceptions based on your trade history.
Mm-hmm. I guess by not lending against ARV, it also takes that experience out of the question a little bit as well, right? You don't have to worry about how well they can execute. You just have to make sure, as long as you just lend against the current property.
Well, you know, the problem with ARV is if you lend on the after renovated value, I mean, that's almost lending 100% loan to value,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's like day one, you're at 100% loan to value. So day one, they decide not to do the project. Now you have a project. You're like, there's no way you're getting your money back. And you're like, okay, now I have a property that I've just funded at 100% loan to value. I might as well just bought it myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing too is that, you know, ARV can be
It fluctuates, right?
it can be
Yeah.
anywhere really. It's really just, it is an estimate, and especially prior to renovation, because everybody's level of renovation is going to be a little bit different. You know, finishes are going to be different. The extent of the renovation is going to be different from contractor to contractor. So it's a really hard number to nail down, which then therefore increases your risk as well.
Yeah.
So what other avenues is private lending utilized for, Victor? I mean, what do you see? You must see some kind of, you know, out there requests come across your desk occasionally.
Yeah, I mean, private lending is used for just about everything. I mean, everybody just needs access to capital. So you'll see people borrow money in advance of receiving funds from a will or an estate. So they know they've got some money coming in, and they need that money ahead of time. I've got a borrower who borrows money. They sell the property, they secure another property through our funds, and then with that funds, they work with another builder who funds that deal, pays us out. They buy that property back from the builder. They have another loan from somebody else, and then they borrow money from us again to pay the builder again to complete that 80% loan, and then that property the title transfers to them. That's probably one of the most complicated borrowers. But those are very astute investor type borrowers.
Yeah, it's good to know there's options out there though for those types of bridge loans to get you from one deal to another, essentially.
And Victor, if you want to be a private lender, you can use your registered accounts as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so you can use your RSP, your TFSA, your LIF, all your registered accounts, and it's great because they're either tax-free or tax-deferred. I set mine up through Olympia Trust, and then they automate the payments by electronic PAD every month. So it makes your life easier, but there are definitely some fees involved using that. But in a tax-free and a tax-deferred environment, I mean, it just more than makes up the fees.
Okay.
So you've got options to kind of leverage out. I mean, you might have some capital yourself, and then you might have some registered money. So then suddenly, if you combine those two together, wow, suddenly you got enough capital to lend out.
Mm-hmm. I think RSPs are huge just because a lot of people, have a lot of money on RSPs if they've been dumping that money into a while, but just enough time sitting there languishing in low interest accounts. So
Yep.
I think that's a really good way to maximize your returns there.
Well, yeah, the thing about the registered accounts is you're pretty minimized on what you can use it for, right? Mm-hmm. So you can invest in stocks, you can invest in GICs, you can invest in some private money markets and private offerings, and then there's private mortgages. but you'd have to move that to an institution that will allow you to issue private mortgages, and those private mortgages have to be not related to you. They got to be arm's length, or else. And then the biggest, like one of the biggest things to remember is you cannot have an equity position in the private mortgage through your registered accounts. Because if you have a personal equity interest, the CRA will deem that as a personal direction of funds and personal use, and they will hit you as a withdrawal. So if you're lending out $400,000 from your RSP, and they know that you have found, suddenly they find a joint venture contract saying that you get a 20% interest in that, they're going to say, wait a second, you use that money yourself, so that means that you withdrew it. So now we're going to hit taxable income on you of 400,000 this year. So you just withdrew 400,000 from your RSP. Like, nobody wants to do that.
And can you define arm's length, Victor? What does that actually mean?
Arm's length means that you are not related to the other person. Yeah, so not in your family. They got to be another party, so that you have no interest in it again.
Okay. Because I read somewhere that like uncles, like like are considered arm's length, or like more distant relatives. Is that true? Is that something that CRA has changed?
Can't or maybe it's non-arm's length, but basically they can't be related to you.
Okay.
No relation. They got to be just like someone else out of your family.
Okay.
I think the term they use is immediate. I think that from the documentation that I read, the term they use is an immediate family member. So class that as you will, Phil. But I think you're probably skirting the rules by.
Yeah, because I read somewhere that uncles count, but I just wasn't sure.
Well, I mean, the thing is, you don't want to risk having a $400,000 withdrawal.
Tax, yeah.
Yeah, right? Because like that just defeats the whole purpose of lending money through your registered accounts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anybody, before we move on here for the evening, does anybody have any questions specifically for Victor that they would like to ask? Please just pop them in the chat and we'll get right to them. But it's definitely interesting, Victor, especially when if you're in the real estate investing world that utilizes private money. It's just so different from working with the big banks, and I think it's important also for people to realize that if you are going to move into the renovation space, the fix and flip world, that the big banks are not really the best avenue to go down to do those projects. I mean, you might get away with one, maybe two if you're lucky, and then as far as we understand, you're going to end up with a bit of a black flag against your name because you're breaking mortgage terms, or the banks are not making the interest that they're assuming they're going to make upon the agreement that you guys are making for those mortgages. So you end up going down the private money route, and it is the proper tool to utilize for these projects, especially if you're going to do multiple.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see that the turnaround on private loan applications they're much faster. You'll get like a 2-day turnaround for approval, whereas going to a financial institution might take you 1 to 3 weeks, depending on how complex the file is that you're trying to borrow on.
Yeah, those funds can be released pretty quickly too, from my understanding.
Yep.
So as long as your numbers are good, you know what you're doing, you can move pretty quickly onto a project. So it is a good idea to get set up with people like Victor, so that you're able to execute, you're able to pull the trigger on deals, and you ahead of time that you're ready to go, you're backed, and you're going to have the funds available to sign your life away. Because a lot of these renovation projects, especially in this type of market where you're having multiple offer situations and over asking prices are where we're currently seeing these renovation projects being sold for, it's tough to write an offer that has any conditions in it. So you're in this situation where you're writing an unconditional offer, meaning that there's no condition to financing, there's no condition to home inspection. It's all or nothing. Like, you're putting yourself in a position where you've got to come up with the funds. So you've got to run your numbers. You've really got to know your carrying costs. And then you've got to be in a position where someone like Victor here has said, yes, we are going to loan you those funds based on that deal. And you know that come closing day, the funds are going to be available, or else you're going to end up in a sticky situation.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting because like active renovators, they'll make a quicker turnaround on the capital, right? So they'll make more per annum because they're actively making income, they're working the deal. But the pressure's on, the timeline is on for the renovators. Like, the more time they take, the more money they're spending. But it's like the exact opposite for private lenders. There's no pressure. The more time that goes by, the better. There's no pressure. There's no time crunch. There's no pressure. Renovators, they're under an immense amount of pressure. Like, they're like, the fastest I can get this out, like, the better. The less I'm paying, the better my margins are. If you have a project go over a year, like, you're probably out of your numbers already.
Yeah, absolutely. Depending on what they were in the first place, that's exactly right. So it's yeah, you have to do your analysis. That is for sure.
So from a pressure perspective, it's a very easygoing profession.
Awesome. Well, Victor, thanks very much for joining us, mate. I appreciate your time, and it's just I love hearing about the private lending world, because I think it's a fascinating way to go for real estate investors.
Yeah, well, I think you guys are almost there. Eventually, we'll see the CWHO private mortgages coming out.
That's it. Watch this space. No, thanks again, buddy.
Thanks, Victor.
For anybody that wants to reach out to Victor, you can see his information on the screen here. Feel free, get in touch, and good luck on the next project, Victor.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Okay, guys. So before we move on here, I'm gonna run through a quick segment here. I'm cognizant of time, but I really want to touch on a couple of points. Check out the podcast on CWHO.ca. There was an episode we did with Victor a little while back, episode 13. And you can see our latest episodes here, Mortgage Mondays with Kim. We did a podcast recently with Barry Maguire, real estate lawyer up in Edmonton. And we also did a podcast with Nick McCullum from a company called Passive, which is a index fund and ETF stock diversification platform. So super interesting. Check it out. Okay, guys, I'm going to run through this very quickly. I am cognizant of time, but I do want to touch on a few things here. So 2021 is going to be an interesting year. We all already know that the 2020 real estate market has been a little bit sort of bizarre. It's been all over the place. We've been seeing records hit in the winter months, which is not typical. So, let's think about that for a second and think about what's coming up later on in this year. So let's jump into it. The first number one, let's increase our cash flow wherever we can. This year and next year in 2023 are going to get super interesting with interest rates. So really take some time to understand where your cash is coming from and do whatever you can to increase your cash flow. So a few things here, especially in real estate in uncertain times. There's talk about interest rates rising in 2023, but that discussion has actually started to change a little bit, and there's talk of interest rates rising now in the latter parts of 2021. So especially when you're investing in real estate, you want to make sure you're looking at properties that are generating good positive cash flow to cover you off in case there are some interest rate rises. Also important to consider reducing your monthly mortgage payments. like get in touch with your bank, see if you can re-amortize a mortgage here or there to actually lower those payments and increase your cash flow. And especially if you're in an acquisition phase. So this is more important if you're in an acquisition phase and you're trying to acquire more and more real estate, is you want to have a better DCR, you want to have more cash flow from your properties. If you're in a principal pay down phase, it's maybe more important to put cash flow onto a property and pay it down a little bit faster. But if you're trying to acquire more properties, you want to reduce your monthly costs as much as possible across the board. And by re-amortizing, by putting a mortgage from 20 years back out to 30 years will dramatically lower your payments. Another consideration is whether it's worth breaking a mortgage term to get a lower interest rate. If getting a lower interest rate can reduce your monthly costs, will that over the term actually save you money? So you definitely need to do some math on that one and call your bank and ask them directly what that penalty might be if you are going to break that term. Another item is to understand whether it's worth locking in a mortgage rate. So if you've got variable mortgage rates at the moment, interest rates from here are likely only going to go one way. So I actually had a call yesterday with a bank and I locked in one of my variable rate mortgages into a fixed rate. Now, the rate that I was paying was 2.05%. The new fixed rate is 1.79. So I was happy with that new term, that new rate, and I'm good with that. But it's also going to reduce that mortgage payment a little bit as well. So it also increases a little bit more cash flow from that particular property. The other component to that call was I actually negotiated a better rate. So the rate they offered me was 1.79. I actually asked the representative on the phone to go and speak with their manager and see if they could do better than the 1.79. They came back and said, yes, we can actually do 1.74. So just simply by asking, I got a better interest rate. And that's all I did. I asked, I said, I've got multiple accounts with you. I've got multiple mortgages, credit cards, the works. Is there anything else that you guys can do to better the interest rate? And they did. So definitely ask the question. Another key component to increasing cash flow is calling your service providers. Now, this includes TV, internet, utility providers, especially if you own a few properties. Even if you don't, make the call. Ask for a discount on your TELUS, your Shaw, your internet, your monthly phone bill. Make these calls every single year. I remember when I had a TELUS service at the time, and they would give me a 6-month promotion. So they would reduce my bill, and after 6 months, it would end. I'd call them back and I would get another 6-month promotion to reduce my costs. And they would do it every time, just quite simply because they didn't want me going to the competitor. And I would also research before I made those phone calls what was available in the market. So I knew I could say, you know what, I'm able to go elsewhere and get a better deal. And that was, I explicitly remember that was TELUS. Every 6 months they would renew my benefits plan that I had with them. So I know I just seen in the chat here, shopping for insurance brokers too. That is absolutely crucial as well. I mean, especially these days, insurance, we just got some notifications that our insurance will be going up between 7 and 11% on some of our investment properties. So definitely shop around for insurance. Number 2, review and refine your systems and processes. So we understand that this pandemic has created issues for nearly 100% of the people in Canada across the board, across the world. So, you know what, if you're experiencing slower times, you're slowed down, this is a time for you guys to not take your foot off the gas. It's time to switch gears and get prepared for opportunities ahead, because this is where opportunities are born. You know, get granular, review your business, review your real estate, your habits, identify what needs to change and what you can do better. You know, create efficiencies, analyze what's working for you, what's not working, and remove any time wasting activities from your schedule or your list of to-dos. Automate as much as you can. Great automation is calendar booking link systems with Zoom integrations. So nowadays I'm able to send a link to somebody that wants to book an appointment or have a Zoom call. They can directly book based on my calendar availability through that link. It adds a Zoom link to it. It's integrated, it's quick, it's easy, and it's simple. Automate as much as you can. Block out your tasks in your calendar, your appointments, family time. Live your time with purpose. Really block it out and book it in, whether it's your own task you're working on, whether it's an appointment with somebody else. Set it up, put it in your calendar, and stick to it. And just start to block out your time. Like Phil said earlier, utilize your calendar and set it up. Turn off notifications when you're working on projects or tasks. Just remove the distractions. Too often these days we sit with our phone right in front of us while we're trying to work on something, and we wonder why it takes us so long to get through things, because we're not concentrating. We're continually interrupted, just notification after notification. Anybody can get in contact with us at any moment in time. You know what? I find that one of the reasons I like working late at night is because I just don't seem to have those distractions, those notifications. And quite often I actually turn my phone off, or I leave it in another room, and I put some music on, I focus, and I get stuff done. Outsource time-consuming tasks that are not high priorities. So if you've got some simpler tasks that maybe are not on the top of the to-do list, outsource them. See if you can find somebody to help you with those tasks, and it'll keep things moving along in the background, but it allows you to focus on priority tasks. Utilize cloud-based document sharing systems, and it enables you to quickly and easily share documents and be organized with your documents from anywhere, cell phones, computers, and use downtime to get organized, get hyper-focused and clear on your goals for the next couple of years and the steps that you can take today. Really take a step back and itemize what you need to do today to achieve your goals in the next couple of years. Know where your money is, what's available, and forecast for the future. The numbers will change as you build your portfolio, as you refinance or sell off. You need to know exactly where you stand to take advantage of opportunities as they arise, and especially in this type of environment, because there's going to be multiple opportunities that come up later this year, I can guarantee it. Work out what cash you have available, what equity you have available, and the equity, if you need to access it, can you access it? And do you have credit set up and available should you need it? Because there's one thing we know: if you need credit, you won't get it. So set it up while you don't need it. Number 3, embrace change. So times have changed. It's pretty obvious. I mean, we're all sitting here where we'd normally be in person together, having a good catch up, shaking some hands and getting out of the house. But you know what? This is how it is now. And we're not sure how long it's going to remain this way, but we have to embrace it. So are you going to change with the times, or are you going to get left behind? That's a simple question that we need to answer. So I put a little paragraph here. It wasn't too long ago that if we saw our phone ringing when someone video called us, we would look at the phone and say, oh my goodness, this person is video calling me. I'm not answering that. But today it's the new normal to answer a video call or to be on Zoom and to see somebody face to face from your phone or your computer. So some of the things that you can do to embrace the change is get the tech tools that you need to operate remotely, video conferencing, Zoom accounts, cloud drives, accounting software. Set up digitized payment systems or auto payments to streamline your cash flow, whether it be your business or your rent payments. Utilize cloud working spaces to communicate with your team, your contacts, Monday.com, Microsoft Teams, etc. Get familiar with them. Continue to network. This is really important. Reach out to new contacts. So this is really difficult to do these days, but you know what? We have to adapt and we have to change. It's difficult being stuck at home to network, but don't be afraid to pick up the phone or send an email and connect with somebody new or somebody that you've wanted to connect with that you've seen on social media. Just connect directly with them. You know what? You've got nothing to lose. And we're all in the same boat too. Review your strengths and weaknesses. Are you going to work on your weaknesses or are you going to outsource them? At the end of the day, we still need to get stuff done. And whether it's a strength to execute a certain task or it's a weakness, if it's a weakness and you're not willing to work on your weaknesses, you know what? You gotta outsource it. You got to get somebody to help you. And that goes for things like bookkeeping or accounting. You know, if you're not a bookkeeper, you're not an accountant, well, maybe you should outsource those tasks to people that are. If you're working from home, get your space set up so you can operate confidently and professionally. I see this one time and time again, is that you're trying to work on your laptop in an environment that's not set up for working, and it becomes frustrating and it's difficult. So get a space, set it up, and it will empower you and enable you to really be comfortable in your environment and get stuff done. Be open to learn new things. Let's face it, there's always something new to learn with technology. So be open to it and do your best to move forward with it. And take a course or master some new skills. I mean, there's plenty to learn. And, you know, there's so many things in the back of my mind that I can think of that I'd love to dive into. And I mean, now's a good time. If you have downtime, now is a good time to build your knowledge base. Yeah, a couple of good comments there. I love this. Do it, delegate it, and dump it. That's a good point, Yuki. Thanks for the comment. So, I mean, guys, look, I wanted to go through that fairly quickly. I know we've gone over time tonight. I appreciate you hanging around, but really, you know, take it on this year. Take it on. Plan the year, and don't be deterred in any way, shape, or fashion. Really take it on and do your best. So before we go, join us at CWHO.ca. Our memberships for our site now are free. You can access the calculators, podcast, all the educational material. When you sign up, we'll add you to the newsletter list. We'll send you the newsletter, the event invites, and just all of our recent content here on a monthly basis. And feel free to reach out at any time. If anybody's interested in the associate program, contact us at hello@CWHO.ca. And yeah, feel free to download the monthly market reports from the website. If you're looking at a joint venture, run your numbers through the calculator. And if you need to reach Phil or myself, feel free to contact us at any time. So once again, Phil, is there anything you want to add before we take off here?
No. I mean, it's just what Brad said in the end, you know, that they're prepared for opportunities this year, because I think there will be a lot of opportunities this year with COVID still going on. So definitely something to keep in mind. But no, that was great, Brad. So thank you.
Okay, guys, thanks very much for tuning in, and we'll see you next month.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Commonwealth Home Ownership Podcast. Be sure to check out all of our past episodes and our ever-growing library of content at CWHO.ca. Until next time, remember to get out there, take action, and create a life of wealth by design.